One of the biggest losers from US President Donald Trump's tariff war so far seems to be Switzerland. The country was one of only a few to see its tariff rate increased between April and August, from the 31% proposed on Liberation Day to 39% now, and Swiss officials are currently scrambling with new offers to present to Trump. But the fiasco has also reignited conversations about Switzerland's relationship with the EU, with some Swiss lawmakers arguing for closer ties and deeper cooperation with the bloc, especially in response to the US's ongoing trade war. So in this video, we'll explain the US's tariffs on Switzerland, the changing state of Swiss-EU relations, and what might happen next. Dive deeper into politics with our magazine Too Long. Yep, we make a real physical magazine. In the latest issue, we discuss how El Salvador and Kosovo became 21st century penal colonies. We ask 6 experts what drives anti-establishment sentiment around the world, and ask if we're observing the end of the American order. Find out more by clicking the link in the description. So let's get straight into it. When Trump imposed that 39% tariff on Switzerland late last month, he claimed that it was because the US runs a trade deficit with Switzerland. In other words, Switzerland exports more to the US than it imports from the US. Trump sees this as unfair because to him, trade deficits indicate that other countries aren't buying enough American stuff. For context, the US ran a trade deficit of $38 billion with Switzerland in 2024. And this is a pretty big trade deficit for such a small country. In fact, it was actually the 13th largest bilateral trade deficit the US ran that year. This is presumably why in March the US placed Switzerland on a list of countries with, quote, unfair trade practices. A week later, the head of Switzerland's State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, Alain Boudelier, travelled to Washington for talks with the Trump administration. And although their purpose was unknown, they were widely assumed to be aimed at preventing a US-Switzerland trade war. However, in early April, Trump unveiled his Liberation Day tariffs, announcing a 31% tariff on Switzerland, which was then delayed due to Trump's 90-day negotiation pause. During this time, Swiss and US officials held talks on a possible deal, with US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent meeting with Swiss President Karin Keller-Sutter, also known as KKS, in Geneva in early May. Switzerland aimed to secure a reduced 10% tariff in return for Swiss companies investing up to 200 billion francs, around $250 billion in the US. And negotiations seem to be going well, with Swiss officials reportedly confident that they've reached a deal. Swiss officials argued, legitimately, that the huge trade deficit the US saw in 2024 wasn't the result of stingy Swiss people not buying enough American stuff, but rather the consequence of an uptick in gold exports from Switzerland to the US. For context, Switzerland is the world's biggest gold refining hub, thanks to its long-standing reputation for quality and discretion. Furthermore, for some unknown reasons, the two big gold trading markets in London and New York use different sized gold bars, with London using a 400 troy ounce bar, about the size of a brick, and New York using a kilo bar, which is roughly the size of a smartphone. When gold moves between the two markets, it usually goes via Switzerland, where it's recast into a different size. And when Trump came to office, tons of gold started flowing from London to New York, because traders worried about potential Trump tariffs on gold, so rushed to bring it into the US before the tariffs came into place. Now, naturally, this gold went via Switzerland, and because it nominally counts as a Swiss export, even though Switzerland is just recasting the gold into a different size, this triggered a mass increase in the US-Switzerland trade deficit. This is why the trade deficit was way bigger in 2024 than it was in previous years, and in general, the US-Switzerland trade balance is dominated by gold. This speaks to a more general truism in economics. Contrary to what Trump seems to think, bilateral trade data just isn't very informative, because in a super-connected global economy, supply chains and trade flows cross national borders in all sorts of weird ways. Now, the Trump administration seems to occasionally recognize this. This is presumably why, for instance, Trump included bans on transshipments in the recently agreed deals with Vietnam and Indonesia to prevent Chinese exports from being rerouted through these third countries. But when it came to Switzerland, Trump apparently wasn't so understanding. On the 31st of July, a phone call about tariffs between KKS and Trump took a disastrous turn. Trump reportedly told KKS that there was no deal, that a 10% tariff would not be sufficient, and even accused Switzerland of stealing money from the US, before then suggesting tariffs above 30%, prompting a White House official to text Buttigieg advising KKS to end the conversation before it got out of hand. KKS later posted on X conceding that no agreement could be reached, and 2 hours later the US announced its shock 39% tariff, above the April rate of 31%, and one of the highest in the world. What makes this so difficult is that Switzerland can't really do anything about it. Switzerland has no carrots to offer Trump. It can't bring down tariffs because they're basically at zero already, and the Swiss government doesn't have the constitutional or political power to offer Trump billions in investment, as say the EU or Japan have done. Nor does Switzerland have any sticks. It lacks the market size to retaliate meaningfully, unlike, say, China. While some lawmakers are calling for Switzerland to terminate its existing order of 36 American F-35 fighter jets, due to be delivered between 2027 and 2030, and instead buy France's Dassault Rafale, the government has repeatedly ruled out this idea, arguing that ditching the F-35s would mean that Switzerland would have no air defense. Consequently, this whole fiasco has sparked discussion about deeper Swiss cooperation with the EU. Last week, Liberals lawmaker André Silberschmidt told Swiss Info that he doesn't believe the US is a reliable partner under this presidency, while Green Party leader Lisa Mazzoni accused the Swiss government of kneeling before Trump and called for close cooperation with the EU. While Switzerland joining the EU isn't a serious prospect, with an overwhelming majority of Swiss against it, there is a sense that in an era where trade wars aren't uncommon and international laws and norms are breaking down, smaller countries like Switzerland are essentially easy targets, and deeper cooperation with the EU, at least on trade policy, might be necessary. At the very least, there's reason to think that Trump's tariff war will put more political momentum behind the so-called Swiss-EU Third Bilateral Agreements, a new package agreed in December 2024 that aims to expand cooperation on a range of areas, and contains measures that will be contentious among the Swiss electorate. For instance, adopting EU laws on areas covered by the agreements, contributing €375 million annually to support poorer EU member states, or a free movement protection clause that allows Switzerland to limit immigration from the EU only in the case of disproportionate economic consequences. Trump's assault on Switzerland has already made some centrist pro-business parties more enthusiastic about this package, and this also builds upon deeper security cooperation between Switzerland and the EU in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All in all, while Switzerland is unlikely to join the EU anytime soon, the EU's appeal as a reliable partner in a world where small countries can no longer rely on international norms to protect them means closer alignment is looking increasingly likely. Now, when you're diving into complicated topics such as this, it's quite easy to get caught up in what you know without even missing a beat. But what about the stories you don't see? Or what happens when the stories you do see are purposely leaving out information to try and sway your thinking? Thankfully, our sponsor this week, Ground News, are experts at helping with just that. That's because Ground News is a website and app that collects thousands of articles from across the world and puts them all in one place for you to easily compare how the news is being covered by different outlets online. For each and every story, you can see the number of sources reporting on it, as well as the political bias, factuality, and ownership of said sources. For example, if we take a look at this story on Swiss lawmakers pushing to cancel the F-35 deal, you can see that there are 36 sources reporting on it, with 6 of them coming from the left and 8 of them coming from the right. You can even compare the headlines to see what either side is saying, with the left focusing on the tariff's disruptive economic impact, in contrast to the right focusing on the political fallout. That's not all though. Ground News has tons of super handy features, and our personal favourite is their blind spot feed. Here you can find stories that have been disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum, helping you challenge your perspective on someone else's media reality. Here at TLDR, we're passionate about helping you understand how bias may affect the media you consume, something that Ground News also firmly believes in. Because of this, we're offering 40% off their unlimited access Vantage Plan subscription if you use the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. You can only access this discount through our link, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started today.